That's what I'm doing. I'll be back.
Hey, sir. How are you? Escorts aren't alarmed. We can
Get up.
Yeah. You get ready, you can get up. Good to see you.
But no one ever really. Hey, how you doing? Happy welcome back. I guess we've been here all year.
Exactly.
We never left.
Exactly.
Faculty left. We've been here, right? Good seeing you again every other day like I'm supposed to.
How are you? How are you? How are you? Happy New Year. I know you did work with those kids. Well, I've been fishing the bus lately now. You know, they changed all the bus routes. So I do it a different way. But
I told you earlier, I could have been here.
I thought you were having other problems.
Well, I was, but at least you could be set up, you know.
Hello. Good morning. Okay, you all know the drill. Come on down front. Come on. Move it down front. Too many of you way back there in the back. Come on. Please come in as quickly as you can and join us down front. Very much appreciated. You went down there? Good morning. Hello and good morning. Thank you all very much for being here and getting seated quickly. We appreciate that. I'm Dr. Anna McFadder, the interim provost. Well, thank you for that. That feels real nice. This is the beginning of a new tradition, as you might have noticed. This is the Faculty and Staff Institute. And this is pulled together because we want to not only include faculty and senior administrators, but also to include our staff. This is an opportunity for all members of the Morgan team to hear about the growth, the achievements, and the challenges of our university. But it's especially an opportunity to take the time to say a very special thank you to all members of the Morgan family, to remind you of how much you and the work you do matters, and matters to the success of our university as well as to our students. And although we don't say it often enough, we really, really cannot do what we do without every single one of you. I also want to extend a hearty welcome to our amazing faculty. It's great to see you. Very, very exciting to have you back again. Yay, faculty. I trust that while you were busy working on your scholarship and redesigning your courses, that you also made time for some relaxation and rejuvenation. Say yes. Oh, that was a real sorry yes. You should have. Like many of you, the beginning of a new academic year is a very special time for me. Reconnecting with our colleagues and preparing to greet our beloved students is indeed very, very exciting. It is also an opportunity for reflecting on the previous year. It's an opportunity to revisit the real purpose for being here and for the extraordinary work we all do every day. And most importantly, to explore whether our focus and the work we do align with our real purpose for being here. Personally, I spend time reflecting on the things I think I've done reasonably well and challenging whether a little extra oomph would have made them spectacular. With some reluctance, but out of necessity, I also revisit the things that just didn't go that well. Like the times I shortchanged students because I needed to finish that grant and edit that manuscript, failing to remember that my fundamental purpose for being here is to educate and serve our students. And sometimes I regrettably recall when I was less patient and understanding than I should have been, failing to capitalize on the opportunity to connect with our students in a meaningful way. I also reflect on the relationships with my colleagues, how truly wonderful and meaningful they are to our collective work and to me personally. But the best part of all about this self-reflective process is reminding myself about the reset button. Every day we get a do-over. We can reset the button and use today's and tomorrow's opportunity for both personal and professional growth. So it is within this context that the theme of our conference, our institute today, again this year, is innovative teaching, where the discovering and embracing strategies that effectively ignite the magic in the education learning process. Equally essential, the Institute is designed to help us continue to gain greater understanding and acceptance of how profoundly the issues occurring in our country and globally affect us all and how they impact the learning experiences of our students. So again, thank you all for your presence today. We trust you will not only enjoy the next 2 days, but that you will also learn something meaningful. I want to give a special thanks and shout out to the Academic Affairs staff who have worked very, very hard this summer, pulling all of this together with fewer and fewer resources. I think they've done a magnificent job. So now it gives me great pleasure to present to you our visionary leader, who is beginning his 9th academic year here at Morgan, and who has thoroughly become a true Morganite. Dr. David Wilson, who will bring you the State of the University Address. Dr. Wilson.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Provost McFadder. That's Provost McFadder. And welcome to all of you for our 2018 Faculty and Staff Institute. First of all, I do want you to join me in really welcoming into the interim provost role Dr. McFadder. When I came to Dr. McFadder and asked her to take on this leadership opportunity here at Morgan, she looked at me and she said, "Now, Mr. President, here's what you need to understand. I don't want that job." But because of my commitment and dedication to Morgan and to ensuring that we continue our ascendancy, I'll do it. And that was really all that I wanted to hear. Thank you very much, Dr. McFadder, for stepping into this role and basically keeping our institution moving forward. As was stated earlier, we are starting this year to invite our staff into an institute as well. And here's the way it will work this year, and then next year and the years that follow will be very, very different than the first year. This fall, we have asked our staff to join us during the morning session where they'll hear the progress that we have made over the last 8 years, and then to hear the next presentation that will involve the compression and market salary study. And then this year, we're not going to have staff workshops in the afternoon and tomorrow. Next year, we'll have staff workshops in the afternoon and staff workshops the following day as well. And so that's the way we're looking at this, because we are really one family here in Morgan, and it takes all of us to continue the progress of this institution. And so please join me, faculty, in welcoming our staff to the Faculty and Staff Institute. Now, I want to also acknowledge the person who will be the keynote speaker after I give the update, and that is Dr. Shirley Malcolm. She's going to get an official introduction from Dr. McFadder later, but just please understand that you are about to hear from someone that the world listens to. She literally is on some airplane every other day or so, traveling, you name it, East Coast, West Coast, the southern part of the United States, the western part of the United States, the northern part of the United States, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, you name it, she is there talking about education, primarily STEM education, and the criticality of that to the competitiveness of the nation. And so we are very, very fortunate to have her this morning, and we look forward to hearing her. I want to do two things with my update this morning. First of all, I became your president July 1, 2010, and as is customary when I give these updates, I like to keep everything contextual. Here's the starting point. Here's sort of the progress and challenges, perhaps, that we've had along the way, and here's where we are now. So you begin to see the progression, and that progression is about you. It's about all of us, and it's about recognizing the progress that we have made as a team, and then understanding perhaps the challenges that always will lay ahead of an institution if you are to continue to advance. So I want to make sure that we place that in context. And then second, we'll move to the update on the compression and market study, and then we'll take any questions you have. So let me see if I can tech myself up here, if you will. And testing. See if this works. And okay, I'm going to assume that this is working. Can everybody hear me? Okay, very good. And so let me start, if you will, as I do with the Faculty and now Staff Institute, by actually giving you just an update on our vision. Because we do have a very dynamic, robust vision here at Morgan, and that vision is to be the premier public urban research institution known for excellence in everything we do. Excellence in research, excellence in teaching, excellence in service. And it's always good to remind us of this particular vision. We are rooted in the great HBCU tradition, but we here at Morgan serve a multiracial, multi-ethnic student population from all over the United States and indeed all over the world. We have 5 strategic priorities at Morgan. I come out of the school of thought that if an institution has 150 priorities, an institution doesn't really have a clear sense of where it wants to go. You have to really, through a collective process, coalesce around what are your top priorities and how do we work collectively to achieve them. And so this is what we decided about 7 years ago, that we would take note of the great progress that this institution had made for 143 years. And now, how do we continue to build it going forward? And we said, well, the first thing is we have to enhance student success. We have to enhance our status as a doctoral research institution. We have to look internally because we do have frustrations internally with our systems and our processes, and we cannot, if you will, ignore them. We ignore them at our peril. And so that's an ongoing process, and those of you who work very closely with me understand that I don't run away from challenges. You have to embrace them, you can't ignore them, you have to take them head on, and then you have to solve the problem. And that's what we have been about for priority number 3. And then number 4, we have to grow our resources. And so, as you're here when you get the update from the market study for salaries, well, if you're not growing your resources, we don't care what the study says. If you don't have the resources to do certain things, then you're not going to be able to do them. Else you lump off something else at the institution that you won't continue to do. And so therefore, we have to grow our resources. And then as we continue to ascend as that premier public urban research institution, we cannot do that in isolation from these neighborhoods that abut us, because we do that as well at our peril. We cannot allow the neighborhoods that abut this campus to go from being under stress to being under siege. Because if we allow that to happen, it will take 50 years to basically make this area a thriving, pulsating, fantastic place to live again. And so Morgan can't be up here and the neighborhoods are far behind. That's what we said. Now let me just run through, so what have you done as an institution? First of all, let me say to our entire community, if I can get up this next slide here, these are some of the things that we said we will look at under each of those goals. I'm not going to go through, but enhancing student success, it means something. Well, what do you do? How do you determine whether you're making progress? You got to look at graduation rates. You got to look at retention rates. You got to look at opportunities for students to study abroad, opportunities for students to get internships. All of those things, if you will, go into enhancing student success. What does it mean to enhance our status as a doctoral research institution? Well, we are a DR3 now, and our goal was to move up to a DR2 institution on our way eventually, under the next president, to DR1. But we want to be a DR2 and then put the institution on a path toward a D1 research institution. And by the way, there is no HBCU that is a D1 research institution. And so we want to be the first, based on my research. And then we, once again, let me go back to the previous goal. I want to point something else. So if you go to our strategic priority where we talked about looking at our own internal processes, let me go back to number 2, please. Somehow I feel like this is not working. So I want you to pay attention as well to number 4, because as we go down the path of enhancing our status as a doctoral research institution, we have policies and systems here at the institution that simply don't work. And therefore, we have to now, and you will hear more about this from me in a couple of days, and then the board on yesterday appointed a special committee looking at research and innovation at Morgan, so we can tease out all of these antiquated systems and processes and structures and policies that don't work, and basically make our institution dynamic and innovative and creative, and we understand our past, but we are not living there, if you will, because to live there is to basically put the institution in a position where we are saying we do not want to progress, and eventually, if you don't, you perish. And that's not who we are at Morgan. And so, in terms of improving and sustaining our infrastructure, that means you got to build environmentally friendly buildings. You got to have students and faculty and facilities that say to our students and our faculty, this is an institution that cares about you. And if you're over there in some dilapidated facility where every time it rains, you got to put on a hat to keep the rain out of the building, then the message is, does this institution really care about me? And so that is really what we are talking about in terms of sustaining our infrastructure and our processes. And then, of course, growing our resources. Here's what it means. We have to ask our alumni to give more. We got to go to the state, and you got to give more, both in terms of capital, operating, and then we have to create, back to research, nimble structures where when our faculty are in the laboratory and they're doing the research we're asking them to do, we want those things to eventually, if they are commercializable, to be commercialized, and we want companies to spring up from that, and we don't want 2 years of discussion about it. And that's what it means then to look at all the pots that make up growing our resources. And then the last one, of course, engaging with the community. We have to start with what is in our backyard, Northwood. Of course, we created the Morgan Community Mile, but we can't go a mile from the campus when we have really an eyesore and the site of criminal activity, if you will, 5 feet from our academic building. And so I'll talk a little bit more about where we are with that. So first of all, let me start by congratulating Morgan. I congratulate the entire university, our students, our faculty, our staff, our board, our alumni, our friends, for receiving reaffirmation of our Middle States accreditation. That was a 4-year-long process, but I did get the letter from Middle States in June of this year with no requirements, 0 requirements, and a commendation from the university. And so our accreditation now has been extended for the maximum number of years to 2025, 2026. We don't have any interim report to submit to Middle States. Quite the contrary, they gave Morgan a commendation. They gave Morgan a commendation based on what they saw here in terms of the faculty, the staff, the students, and the progress that had been made over the last 10 years. We met all of these seven standards from Middle States. And so they changed the process from the last time and reduced it to 7 standards. Morgan met all 7 of those standards. I want to take this opportunity to thank, next slide, I think that's the way we'll have to go here, the self-study committee chairs. We had chairs who basically oversaw each of a particular area. We just have them listed here. We'll have this on the web. You can see all of these incredible individuals. And then I want to thank the co-chairs of the self-study committee, Dr. Maurice Taylor, Dr. Solomon Malau, who actually did a very, very good job of putting together our self-study. And so, next slide. These are the individuals who actually served on the steering committee. So as you can see, this was really a university-wide effort. And when you come together as a university, one, as a team, it's amazing what the result can be. And this result was reaffirmation with no requirements. Congratulations, Morgan. Next slide. Next slide. So now, enhancing student success. Next slide, please. So here, look at our retention rates. And so this area in here, this is historic for Morgan. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the 8th year is not here yet, but that was also in the 70s. Morgan has never in its history, since retention rates started to be counted, been in this category. And so we are now, what that means is that we can now project that if we bring in 1,000 freshmen, that we can plan on at least an average of 750 of those returning as sophomores. That is what your retention rate is. Now, I think an institution, a neighboring institution, they may have a retention rate of like 85%, so they would count on bringing 850. So we're not satisfied with being in the mid-70s, but we have come a long way to a consistent pattern, and you play a major role in that because Dr. Turner and Dr. Mfume and the staff over in the Office of the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Success, they really are driving this administratively and perhaps visionarily. But in order for that to happen, it has to have the same kind of collective buy-in as the self-study process did to lead to these kind of results. And so for those who've studied retention rates, you know that what happens in the classroom is more important than what happens externally. And so that's why you as faculty really have a critical role to play, and then you as staff have an equally critical role because students, if they don't have the kind of experience in offices that is welcoming and embracing, and if you're not meeting them every day with a smile on your face and helping them solve their problems, they're going to look to another place and transfer. And so everybody has some skin in this game. So now you can see here that we also are returning more freshmen to the institution at the beginning of their 3rd year. And so it's no longer just come back as a sophomore. How many are coming back as juniors? And then the next slide. Then how many are actually returning at the beginning of their 4th year? And so we have a 50 by 25 initiative, and you'll see that we are well on our way. But what this says is that if we are getting, just hold that one for one moment. So if we're getting now 59% of our freshmen returning as seniors, that is a way that's moving us closer and closer to our 50% graduation rate because those individuals, for the most part, have a year or a year and a half to finish the institution. And so these are all good statistics. Next one, and you can see here, once again, look at the progress that we've made in our retention rate. So I came on board about, was it right here, Dr. Turner? At 29%, I believe. What was it, 30? No. These are actually in 6-year intervals. Yeah, so you have to add 6 years to this number here. And so, so this will be 2011, which was actually when we start to count the retention rates from 2011. So you have to add 6 years to each of these to get the current retention rate. And so this will be 2018, 2017, 2000. I think you get my drift here, right? Because that's the way retention rates are counted in a 6-year window. Graduation rates. And so here, when the last student crossed the stage in May of this year, we are near 40% graduation rate. That is something that you need to applaud because that is student success. And so that is, so if we take if you will, 30%. That is, my mathematicians here, that's almost a 40% increase. It's a 9 percentage point increase, but it's almost a 40% increase overall in graduation rates. I have no doubt that in perhaps a couple of years, we said 50 by 25, but I have no doubt that in 2 years, we will be standing here celebrating our having eclipsed the 50% graduation rate, and I can promise you that we're going to have some champagne here on the stage for our students. So moving right along, we also have increased our enrollment here at Morgan during this period. I think the important thing here is that there are 4 historically black colleges and universities in Maryland. The other 3 are in the system, we're not. Collectively, those in the system over the same time period have lost 9% of their enrollment. Morgan, on the other hand, has increased its enrollment from 7226 to last year's 7747, about 500 students. So we've had, once again, that's about an 8% increase in enrollment, while there has been a decrease in enrollment within the HBCUs collectively within the system. And so once again, we're not standing still. We can't stand still. We got to fish in a lot of ponds. We got to not just fish in the pond that Morgan traditionally has fished in, because everybody has a hook in that pond now. And so that's what we're doing with our enrollment management strategy, and that's how we're trying to stay competitive in enrollments. Next slide. In terms of student diversity, we have, as in our strategic plan, that we wanted to increase the diversity amongst the students here at Morgan. And so last year, 24% of our students here were non-African American. And those students are coming from 40 states and about 65 countries. Next slide. Also, in terms of our international students, we were very deliberate about this. We basically had 394 international students here in 2007, and last year we had 945. And so that is almost a 300% increase in international students. And so that adds to the flavor of the campus, the diversity of the campus. We understand that when we increase any critical mass of students to that level, you also have to put in place additional services in order to minister to the needs of those students. But we have a Division of International Affairs that is constantly evolving so that our international students will become fully integrated into the Morgan experience. We don't want any students to just come through Morgan in the vernacular with their own posse. We want you to form relationships and friendships in areas that you're not comfortable when you enter the institution. And that's sort of what we are seeking to do as we continue to advance in this area. Bachelor's degrees, all-time high. And so when the last student crossed the stage in May of this year, Morgan State University had awarded 1,153 baccalaureate degrees. You can see here, we have never been in that category. That is really quite impressive. Moving on to the next one. We also, in terms of enhancing student success, I don't know how many of you have made your way over to the Rawlins Dining Hall, but nothing had been done over there, and since the building was erected, I believe in 1990 or something like that, or I may have my year incorrect, but around that time. And so we renovated the dining hall and made it more contemporary to say to our students, we care about you. And they really, really appreciated that. We extended the Bear Transit hours, because we have a lot of students who live in apartments that are, not just adjacent to the campus, but a little ways away, and so we're concerned about safety issues, and so we extended those hours so we can get students where they need to go, especially late in the evening. And then we piloted, as you know, 24-hour library services. And we are looking at the data from that to see what the usage was, and then how we may actually budget for that now long-term once we discover that the students actually are using the facility in a way that would justify whatever investment we make. And then we have worked with the new owners of Marble Hall to refurbish those units over there that we are leasing, and we're leasing 518 units in Marble Hall because we have a great demand now here for student housing, and we can't accommodate all the students. And so two things are happening. The retention rates are increasing. It means that more students are returning to the institution, and they want to live on campus. And then the brand of the institution has elevated, and more students are accepting our office of admission. And so when you put those two things together, you have a perfectly good storm. But then the institution can only be in this space for so long before it figures out the long-term solution. Otherwise, the students are going to become frustrated, and you can lose that which you have spent a lot of energy building. And so we expect the largest incoming class of freshmen this year in our history or close to our history. And we are now, even right now, in negotiations with apartments that are not far from the campus, open up additional beds, and then how do you make sure the students are going to be transported back and forth in a way that they won't miss classes. So you need to know that this is happening to enhance student success, but long term, we will be bringing to our Board of Regents a proposal to build new residential housing on the campus. And that will be coming, perhaps, Regent Malcolm, I think we are looking at perhaps sharing with the board what our strategy will be at the November meeting and giving ourselves a 3 to 4 year window to erect the first new student housing complex on the campus. We are now thinking about raising the Thurgood Marshall complex, that entire complex. It is very inefficient, it is poorly built, and we are a landlocked institution, and we need to take greater advantage of that land and build a greater density of student housing with all the modern amenities in it. And that might be our first student housing project that you will see. The students actually brought to the provost and myself some concerns that they had with some things that were happening in the classroom, some interactions with professors, and there's always two sides to every story, as you know. And so what we did was to work with the students to establish something called a Student Academic Advisory Council, where they meet with the provost on a monthly basis, just to kind of share what they are picking up in terms of their academic experiences at the institution. And then through the Academic Affairs Council, the provost then is sharing that information with many of you so you'll know what types of experiences the students are saying they're having in the classroom and how they actually can benefit from looking at these things differently. I think when you hear Regent Dr. Malcolm's presentation on innovative teaching, some of this, if you will, is connected, because what I've had to understand is that the students that we get today, they have grown up so very differently. And for those of you who have children in this space, like I do, they are so savvy. They have grown up now with Uber and Amazon, and they basically take out their cell phone and click something, and 4 hours later, it magically appears. And so this is the worldview. And so therefore, when they set foot on the campus and they click something and nothing happens, I think you see where I'm going here. So it's like the minute they set foot on the campus, there's a disconnect with their reality. And so we're going to start a discussion as we bring our new student services building on board about how we create in that structure and on campus now the kind of alignment of where the students are and where the future is with the way we deliver the services to them. I've said to Dr. Turner and our staff in Montebello, we love you in Montebello, the way we love you in Truth, the way we love you in the business building. In Montebello, however, over the years, it has built up a reputation. And when we opened the new building, what we said is that the reputation has to stay over there. And so you can't bring into the new facility the old practices, or some of those practices actually may be quite contemporary, but the students and others, they can't get past this kind of image of what that is. And so you got to be very, very conscious of that, and so that's the way we're looking to bring that forward. Next slide. Basically, we're making an intentional effort here to ensure that all of our facilities are ADA compliant, and it came to our attention last year that we have some issues, and so Kim McCullough and Sydney Evans have gone out. We have employed a consultant to come in, look at all of our facilities on campus, because you can't just approach this willy-nilly and say, okay, so what is the magnitude of the problem? Because you have to know the magnitude of the problem in order to strategically address it. And so that's what we're doing here. Next slide. And then we got Greek plots. You wouldn't believe that that was the most popular thing in terms of student success that we've ever done. Was to, on the mall here, if you go and you see those cement blocks there, where they, Greek letter organizations are going to have their insignias. Wow, I mean, this was 5 home runs, right? So sometimes it's listening to what the needs of the community are and going forward and implementing them. And some of these things are not costly. It just requires us to think a little bit differently. Next slide. In the College of Liberal Arts, we, of course, got our first major grant, $500,000 from the Mellon Foundation. They have renewed that, and then they have been so impressed with Morgan and the liberal arts and the humanities that they said to us, submit another proposal. We want 2 grants outstanding to you. And so Dean Ngone and the faculty over in the Gilliam College of Liberal Arts submitted a proposal to Mellon, and they were funded for $375,000, and they are basically going to use that to establish an interdisciplinary minor leading to a major in African American and African diaspora studies. And so congratulations to the College of Liberal Arts. Likewise, I think the College of Liberal Arts is trying to outpace engineering and the sciences here, Dr. Yu and Dr. Scott. And so they got another $500,000 grant. I kind of like the tone of that, right? And so they got that from the Luce Foundation. And then, of course, Morgan continues his great tradition of having professors here to win Fulbrights. And congratulations to Dr. Mataferia, who was awarded a Fulbright to actually teach and do research in Israel. It took us about 3 or 4 years to kind of usher through that baccalaureate degree in liberal studies. You can see that it is now becoming a very, very popular degree. This is a hybrid degree, where students who may come into the institution wanting to major in something, but they switch majors and then they switch majors. And so basically, they're not really sure about a discipline, but they want certain skills. And this degree is designed for that purpose, as well as for non-traditional students who are coming back to school, and they are not necessarily coming back to school because they want that BS degree in English or the BS degree in history, though those disciplines are very important. They want skills. They want the critical thinking skills. They want the writing skills. They want the technology skills. And so we have to think about degrees going forward that are also in certain disciplines, but we have to increasingly, as a university community now, think about bringing 6, 7 disciplines together and creating these new degrees in a way in which the skills are most needed for the students that are desiring them. And that's the way you have to always be innovative and to move forward and be in concert with what the students want. I actually read this publication earlier in the spring. Colleges, university.com has ranked Morgan State University amongst the best colleges with psychometrics and quantitative psychology degrees in the U.S. I looked at the list, and we were number 7 on the list. And they looked at every school in the country. the Ivy League, the Big Ten, University of Chicago, all of those institutions who had these programs, our program was number 7. Next slide. Here as well, we really applaud these 2 faculty members from the School of Community Health and Policy who actually are pursuing patents now and have been granted provisional patents for their incredible work. And so congratulations to Dr. Wooten and Dr. Edwards. Next slide. Also within the School of Architecture, Dean Akers, our program is ranked 2nd nationwide in the number of blacks or African Americans with bachelor's degrees in architecture. So Morgan has a very strong value proposition here. And the retention rate in the school, I love friendly competition when it involves moving students more toward their goals. And this is friendly, productive competition. Which school can have the highest retention rate? Which school can have the highest graduation rate? Because at the end of the day, what we're celebrating is the success of the students, right? And so here, the School of Architecture and Planning has a first year, a 60% graduation rate of 42%, and so they have exceeded the university-wide 39%. Congratulations to the School of Architecture and Planning. Also, many of those students now are going on to get graduate degrees at the Ivy League institutions and University of Michigan and places of that sort. And so we also congratulate the job that the faculty are doing in the School of Architecture and Planning to prepare our students to be successful at these institutions. Speaking of the Ivy League, earlier this year, we signed a great partnership agreement with the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. We were very, very pleased with the way that conversation unfolded because Morgan is a partner with Wharton and Penn. We're not subordinate to anybody. Never, ever will we be. And so we went into the conversation with a simple way of looking at this. The University of Pennsylvania and Wharton, you have something in a glass over here. Morgan, we have something in a glass over here. What we have in these glasses may not be the same, but what you have in your glass is not better than what we have in ours. It's just different. And so, therefore, how do we create out of the 2 glasses that don't necessarily have the same thing in them something that moves both institutions forward? And that is the way the partnership actually evolved. And so I really thank Dean Bogosian and our faculty and staff and the Earl G. Graves School of Business and Management for moving this partnership forward. And for all of the other things going on in the Earl G. Graves School as well. Great partnership with Goldman Sachs in the 10,000 Small Businesses Initiative. Last summer, that partnership was announced on the stage with Warren Buffett, as well as the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and also with Michael Bloomberg, the CEO of Bloomberg Industries here in Baltimore. And Morgan State University is the lead partner institution in this initiative, and we're very, very pleased with that as well. On to the next one. Our nursing program was accredited this year, the undergraduate nursing program. So, yay, big shout out, Dean Sitnor and Dr. Anderson and all of our faculty and staff in the School of Community Health and Policy and our nursing program. So all 3 of our nursing programs here are now fully accredited. And going to the next slide, this is just phenomenal. And so of all of the students that have now graduated from Morgan since January, I think we've had, 14, and they have sat for the nursing exam. We have a 100% pass rate, a 100% pass rate, if you will, with 1 student to go, but no pressure, right? And so congratulations as well, Dean Sitton. Next one. Study abroad, as I said, we really have spent a lot of time elevating our study abroad opportunities. Dr. Jakob Vastasi, I'm not sure he's here, he's heading up that division right now. And I think the takeaway here is that look, this year we sent 115 students here at Morgan abroad to study, and they have gone all over the place. You know, Asia, Europe, if you will. These are the semesters. Africa and the Middle East, Latin America, the Caribbean. And so our students are taking the mantra of, I'm the future, and I have to understand the world. I don't care what the noise is coming from other places. It's not going to distract me from understanding different cultures, different nationalities that are different than my own. This is the foundation of our education here at Morgan. And we can't ever, ever forget that, and we've got to continue to motivate and inspire our students that there is a lot of noise out there, but we as an educational institution, to them, have to be the signal. We have to be the laser. And that laser, if you will, can cut through noise. And that's what we have to be to our students, to make sure that they're understanding that, no, we're not going to take a back seat, if you will, to these opportunities that's going to enable you to be the leaders of this nation that our nation so critically needs. And that's what these study abroad opportunities are about. And we have a great partnership now with the two top study abroad associations in the country. One is coming, I think, in 2 weeks to visit us, and this is CIEE, because they want to explore, quote unquote, now a big partnership with Morgan. And so we'll keep you up to date with regard to that. Athletics, very pleased with the progress that Mr. Ed Scott, our AD, has been making there in athletics in a relatively short period of time. And he gave a presentation to the board yesterday. If you want a copy of that, we'll send it to you. But the bottom line is that we really are doing the right thing with our student athletes. And we presented this to the NCAA, and they said, you know, Morgan, you got it right now, because you can't have athletics over here in a silo. Athletics is in academic affairs. These are our students, and they are student athletes. And you can't treat them any differently than the student over here who's majoring in engineering, who is as far away from an athletic team as I am. And so they are really pleased with the way we have integrated academics into athletics. Division of Academic Outreach and Engagement, we've got $1.5 million, of course, to endow a scholarship for non-traditional students, students, whatever, 22 and over, because we are here in Baltimore, and we have to ensure that we are making opportunities available for non-traditional students to come back to school. We are a little bit too traditional as an urban research institution. I have to be very direct with you in this regard and respectful, but as we move toward being the preeminent public urban research institution, you show me a public urban research preeminent institution that does not have perhaps even 20 to 25% of its students as non-traditional. It's just the way these institutions operate within these large urban centers. And so we'll be spending a lot of time on how we create a special division that will attract students who want to get a degree on weekends, want to get a degree by coming late at night, online, those kind of things. And then enhancing our status as a doctoral research institution is kind of speeded up a little bit, if you will. Dr. Willie May, we welcome as our new VP for Research and Economic Development, Dr. Willie May. Dr. May has been with us now for about 2 months. He comes to us highly credentialed, did his undergraduate degree in chemistry at Knoxville College and HBCU in Tennessee, and then went on to get his PhD in chemistry from the University of Maryland. And of course, he comes to us from being a U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce under the previous administration, and also director of NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. We welcome Dr. May as our Vice President for Research and Economic Development. And you can see here that we have basically, this is from the previous year, sort of a source of our funding agencies along the way. Next slide. But I think the takeaway here, and this is, the important thing here is $34.3 million that we brought in last year, and this is how those dollars actually are allocated across the schools. But hopefully the next slide will show, okay, so 34.2 million. Never in the history of the institution have we been in that category. So we brought 34.2 million, and what I've said to Dr. May is that we now want to move to $50 million. And so when we go back to that first slide that I showed to you, there's no way we're going to move to $50 million with some of the antiquated processes we have. Okay? I get that. And whatever we need to do at Morgan to tear down those processes, to replace them and put in place a nimble division that's going to get us there and behave like College Park and behave like the University of Virginia and behave like whomever is in that space, that's what we have to be committed to doing. And that is how we're going to then increase this from 34 million to 50 million and beyond. Next slide. Next slide. And I also want to welcome our new director of the Pearl Center down in St. Leonard, Maryland, Dr. Scott Knock, who was appointed in March, and they hosted another open house. If you have an opportunity to come down to these open houses, they're usually in June. It's a really, really wonderful thing. We got about, 200, 300 people or so who come. It's usually from 10 o'clock until about 2 o'clock, and you'll get a chance to see Morgan in Southern Maryland on the water. And I can attest to the fact that when you make that drive down there, and when you come back, your blood pressure is lowered by 20 points. We also are very pleased that NASA guest star, we had a grant, a collaborative agreement with them, as you remember, for 5 years initially, valued at about $28 million. And so we struggled a little bit with that early on. And sometimes it is good to struggle early on because you realize what you don't have in place. And so we didn't have in place the infrastructure to support all of the requirements of that particular grant. And you know those things bubbled up. And we then had to go in there, make some tough decisions. We did that, and basically created a situation where NASA then became extremely happy and satisfied with what was going on here at Morgan. And so as a result, they have upped us for another 5 years. And the value of that is $22 million. And so we have the potential here over this 10-year period to have brought into the institution $50 million from NASA. Now, we want to be in a position where in the NASA space, we don't want them to put out a competition for this at the end of the upcoming 5 years. But in order for that to happen, there's some things that we have to do within the research division to enable it to be more nimble so that in the next 5 years, there won't be a recompete. Because if there's a recompete, then it opens up to every institution in the country, and that would be very, very challenging for us. So moving forward, we have great summer internships that are taking place now. Students coming from engineering and Dr. Wu's School of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences. Moving forward, please. And so Dr. Wu informed me that this summer we have 19 students that are interning now in the Silicon Valley. And so we have 10 students that are interning at Google, 6 at Facebook, 1 at Intel, 1 at IBM, and 1 at Apple now. And so we really, really appreciate the kind of progress that we're making there. Next slide. We also are moving toward announcing what Google is implementing as the Google HBCU Tech Exchange Program that will involve, they initially invited 8 HBCUs into that program. I think about 5 to 6 are now going to participate. But the long and short of it is that they are creating an opportunity for as many students as the institution can vet to come out to Google for an entire year during their junior year and take all of their computer science courses there with both faculty, in this case from Howard and Google and Stanford. And so they'll take 12, 15 credits during the fall, 12, 15 credits during the spring. All those will be in alignment with their coming back to Morgan to get their degree from the institution at the end of their senior year. And so we have 5 students that have been selected for this program, and then Google has given each one of them a $10,000 scholarship to offset the cost. And so moving right along. Next, how many of you read about our economic impact? And so this is an attempt to quantify. And so we all know, that anecdotally we can tell a good story. But at some point, if you're making the case for additional investments in the institution, the people who make the decisions, they have to really see data. And so this was an attempt then to quantify, so what is our economic impact? So Morgan has an annual economic impact in Maryland, we're not talking about all, the 50 states, just in Maryland, of nearly $1 billion every single year. $1 billion every single year, of which 574 million of that every single year is in Baltimore City. And so with these numbers, when we go down to Annapolis and we go to corporations and foundations, we can say, this is the return on the investment that you're making in us. So the state is making an investment of about $97 million a year in Morgan. But they're getting 10 times more in terms of return. And so I don't want you to look at Morgan as an expenditure. We are an investment, and we are giving you a dividend, and so that's what this is all about. Master's degrees, you can see we hit our all-time high last year, 305. We dropped this year to 268, but still, that is the 4th highest that we've had, in the last 10, 15 years. And so that's the way we look at master's. Doctoral degrees, we're really, really good company here now. So we are averaging now over 50 doctoral degrees per year. So if you take the 34 million that we brought in last year, and you take now this average of 50 doctoral degrees over the last 4 or 5 years, I am reasonably optimistic that by the end of the calendar year, we might perhaps be elevated to doctoral research too. With these accomplishments, that's really where the Carnegie Commission is looking at the average number of doctoral degrees you have awarded over a certain number of years. So what's the trend? And then usually you have to stay in the 40s to go to DR2. And then what's the average amount of grants that you have received over that period? And it's usually somewhere between 30 and 35. And so I think we are pretty close to being there. Next slide. Baccalaureate, STEM baccalaureates. Dr. Malcolm, I know this is something that is very near to you. And so you can see here, almost 300 STEM baccalaureates. If this is not diminishing our students who come here in any other discipline, it's just that in this field, the country has moved to a point where you got to kind of report these numbers out a little bit differently because they are associating those more with the kind of economic development and innovation, if you will, and that's another kind of conversation that we need to have, but this is what we're doing in the area of STEM. Next slide. Improving our infrastructure. Let's kind of get through these in the next 5 minutes, if you will. We are opening up a kiosk in Cebus. And so we're going down now, and we have completed all the work, and so by the time the students return and by the time classes start, you'll be able to go down and eat in Cebus and grab some food there. We also are now in the middle of constructing Tyler Hall next door. Next slide and next slide. And this is what that building is going to look like, and it is on track and on budget and will be completed by the summer of 2020. So within 2 years, we'll be moving to this new facility next door. And then we realize here at Morgan that we have deferred maintenance issues. These are the projects we have completed, But we also have these other deferred maintenance issues. We can't run away from them, and we don't have $100 million in the budget. And so how do we strategically address these issues in a way to keep the university moving forward, knowing that we have a lot of pent-up issues? And so many of our old buildings are not constructed in the way that they should have been. We've seen water filtration issues in some of the buildings, so we got to go in now, and that's unplanned, and move dollars around to try to make this work. But I think the bottom line here, what I'm trying to get across to our faculty and staff, is that we understand that we have some challenges. And if you would just work with us, we're going to work through these challenges together as a team. And that is really, really important in the deferred maintenance area. Okay, move forward. Standard & Poor. We don't have enough money here at Morgan, but we certainly try and manage it effectively. And so Mr. Sidney Evans and his team have done another very, very good job. So we got an A+ stable outlook rating from Standard & Poor, one of the top rating agencies in the country. Basically, I think based on our research in the HBCU world, Morgan is #1, tied with Spelman College and North Carolina A&T in terms of having the top bond rating in the HBCU land. And this is actually one of the top bond ratings of a university as well. We are at least in the top echelon of colleges and universities in this area across the country, HBCU or non-HBCU. We are in Times Square. We got a very, very good deal here to run this ad in Times Square. It's running now. It will be up, Ms. Hitchcock, through November, the end of October. And so it's around Broadway and 45th, 43rd. That's close enough. And so, you know, when you go to Times Square, as someone said yesterday, they never look up, they always look down. So now we want you to stand and look up a bit and then walk those 2 blocks. But this is a way of bringing Morgan to that particular space where I believe they're getting up with nearly 1 million or so visitors in that space per day or per week. Larry had the numbers for me, but it's pretty close. In terms of our operating budget, this year we see a state increase of $3.2 million. $2 million of that is designed to put in place a Center for Cybersecurity, and so that's moved along. And then $600,000 of that is where we are starting the process of converting our contractual staff to full-time with benefits. We have not forgotten our contractual faculty. We'll look at this as well in the next legislative session and try and get state money so we can actually now do both of those. But this year, the state opted to fund $600,000 to allow the process for conversion for staff to move forward. Next slide. And we also are coming away with $46.5 million in capital to enable us to continue the construction on the Tyler Hall, and then to move toward the raising of the Armory there on the corner of Argonne and Hillen Road. And in that space, that's going to be the new Health and Human Services building, and so that's in the hopper now. We're looking to break ground on that building perhaps in a couple of years, Kim? Yes, in a couple of years with a completion date of perhaps the summer of 2024, in 6 years. And that project is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $150 million, something like that. So this building that we are looking to now put up at the corner of Hillen and Argonne to house the School of Social Work, the School of Community Health and Policy, that will be the most expensive capital project in our history at 100 and almost 50 million. And we are now meeting with the governor, lieutenant governor, and the secretary of the Department of Budget and Management to make the case for moving up our science complex, to see if we can get that science complex actually within the next 5 or 6 years. And that is, quote unquote, creating challenges for the state, but my view is those are your challenges. You should come and look at where our faculty and our students are. And we got to figure out a way to make this happen. But we realize that this project is going to be close to $250 million in order to do what we want done, which will be to raise the Washington Service Center, and we're going to put a new science building on that corner, and then we're going to renovate McMecken and move mathematics and computer science into that facility, and then we're going to do some more renovations of Dixon. And so we want a world-class complex, and we want that to be second to none. And so that's the way we're looking at the capital going forward. So let's kind of move forward, continue. And so going back to 2010, when I came on board, the state was appropriating to us $73.9 million. We've increased that by about $23 million over that period of time. So now we're getting about $97 million moving forward. And student tuition is accounting for about $69 million. And so, we get about $97 million from the state, roughly about $70 million from student tuition. And then the rest of our $260 million budget is coming from grants and contracts and auxiliaries and things of that sort. Our campaign, and so we announced a $250 million campaign for Morgan, and the goal was $200 million on the public side, $50 million on the private side. We have exceeded the $50 million on the private side. We are now at roughly $51 million on the private side. And on the public side, we are about $192 million or so. So we're about $8 million short of completing the goal of $250 million, and we have no doubt that we will get there within the next year. And so I appreciate the work that Cheryl Hitchcock and her team has done to get us to this point. Moving on. The alumni also stepped up to the plate, so they've gone from 6.5% in terms of their annual giving, and I think we're up to 17 again. So this was last year, a little dip last year, but now we're up to 17% again. This is the highest percent of alumni giving of any public university in the state of Maryland, right? And so I did not want that to be lost. Next slide. And then in terms of our annual pledges, we now, last year we reached $8 million in terms of our annual giving, and so we are consistently now in this range. Most of that giving is going towards student scholarships, and that's why maybe some of this is not making its way back into the academic departments, into your classrooms, because donors love to give to scholarships. Now we got to do some more work to kind of get them to look at other ways of giving. Next slide. We also are very visible now with our campaign in the airport, and we're looking at train stations. I mean, you got to be proactive and let people know that this is a really dynamic institution, because you go to Penn Station, or go to Penn Station in New York, you go to Penn Station here, and you can see, well, Westchester and all these, Penn State. And so, it's like, wait a minute, where's Morgan? This is our home. And so you got to be very, very proactive in sending this message out. You fly into Atlanta now, you see Georgia State all in the airport. Right? And so universities are behaving very differently in this space than they did just 4 or 5 years ago, and we cannot be out there be not in the thought process of individuals. Also, we've gotten several grants. We got this $50,000 grant from Georgia State because we've been kind of looking at them as a model, as you know, in terms of our retention and graduation rates. So we thank Dr. Mfume and Dr. Turner for leading that effort. Next, 50 by 25, I've spoken about that. We thank you, faculty members, for your role in helping us to move this forward. We have no doubt that we will reach 50% by 2025. Next. And then last, engaging with the community. This is what I spoke about when I started. You can see the progress that you're making at the institution on our goals. And now we have to make sure that we don't put too much distance between the progress that Morgan is making and our neighborhoods. Because once you kind of put a lot of distance there, you're beginning to lose trust, and a lot of things can kind of spill over into those communities that then could erode the progress that we've made. So with that in mind, the Northwood Shopping Center. Dr. Shirley Malcolm is a member of our board, but she chairs the Finance and Facilities Committee. And this is kind of an unusual for an esteemed academic to basically chair your governing board's Finance and Facilities Committee, but she has your back. She is an academic on the board, the only academic on the board, and she views these issues, as I informed Dr. McFadder, who has been in the board, from the perspective of faculty and research and dynamics of the institution. But she also understands this connection between that and how an institution behaves as an anchor institution. And so this project is under her aegis at the board level. So she has understood all of the complexities of this. And as a result of that, on yesterday, the board passed its final lease cementing the partnership between Morgan State University and the developers of the Northwood Shopping Center. And what that means is that now the development of that is out of our hands. Morgan has done everything that we can and more to make that happen. We are partnering with the developer in two ways. The first is, you can't see it really, go back one, please. So right here, right next to Jenkins Hall, and this is going to be a town center concept, and so there's going to be shops on both sides, not just a strip mall. And so next to Jenkins, this is, you see, Barnes & Noble Morgan State Bookstore. That's the bookstore right there, okay? And that bookstore, I'm going to move it from the Student Center, move it over to, and it will have a cafe and a lounging area inside. So a kind of community space for faculty, staff, students, the community, come in, lounge, get a book, read, get some coffee, get a sandwich, et cetera, et cetera. That is going to be the first building, and then all these other, everything you see over there right now is going to be raised. Everything. And they're starting anew. The second aspect of the partnership, next slide, is this building here. This is the preliminary design. This is facing Hillen Road, and this is going to be our public safety building that will house our police and campus security. And you can see the concept there in the shopping center. So so you're going to walk up these steps. This is Barnes & Noble here, and then this is the main street. And so you have shops on this side, and then shops on this side. This is Argonne over here, and this is Hillen Road this way. The business school is about there, if you will, and Jenkins is about there. So we now are approaching the engagement with our community with a high degree of intentionality, and that, our Morgan family, is where we stand at a very high level as of August 2018. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so at this point, I'm going to bring forward our consultant, Michael Mishari, from Evergreen Solutions out of Tallahassee, Florida. We put out what we call an RFP, a request for a proposal, over 2 years ago to look at the issue of salaries at Morgan. And put this in context. We thought, so remember we did a study because at Faculty Institute, a faculty member said, President Wilson, we think we have some real issues here with regard to gender pay. And of course you don't know, but you have to get someone from the outside to come in and look and see if you do. And so we put out an RFP, we got a firm to come in, they looked at that and they said, well, no, we're not finding any significant issues at Morgan with regard to differential in pay by gender. And what I think some of our faculty colleagues were, the way they were looking at this at the time was that, okay, I'm a full professor in Dean Wells, I'll just kind of use education as well. So I'm a full professor in education, and I've been here for 15 years, and I'm making $90,000. And here is an associate professor in engineering or in business who has been here for 2 years and is making $130,000. And I'm female, and this person is male, and so therefore I should be making more than this person. Okay, so that's not the way you look at faculty salaries. So you got to look at faculty salaries across the entire universe by discipline, if you will, because they are very different by disciplines. And so by disciplines, wherever you are, you're going to get faculty in the professional schools making much, much more than faculty in other places. And so that consultant had to tease all that out, because an assistant professor in education, in social work, in the liberal arts, or whatever, that salary is different than a assistant professor in engineering or in business. And it has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with the market and the demand and how those salaries have been paced over forever. So that's what's the result of that. But that report said, but we think you should be looking at issues of compression. And so do you know what compression is? Right? And so when we hired the consultant, we said to the consultant, yeah, we want you to actually look at two things. We want you to look at compression and see what issues we have there. But also we are interested in where we are with regard to the market. So we can now kind of bring two things together, and I'm going to bring the consultant up. We understand here at Morgan that we don't have money to pay everybody a market salary, but we need to know where we are in terms of the market, in terms of what we have identified as our peers, in order to try and figure out what's going to be our policy then going forward once we ascertain what the market is. And that will drive the way we look at whatever we will do going forward. So with that said, let me bring up the president of Evergreen Solutions, who can walk us through the results of the study, and we'll be more than happy to address any questions when he's done. Oh, you want to use the podium? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I will try to make this painless. I know we've gone through a lot so far this morning, so I've got a bit to cover with you about the study. I'm going to start with an overview of what we'll be covering. There we go. The first thing we'll be covering is the overall study objectives, and so speaking to what were we tasked with as a firm to produce for the university. Then we'll be talking about what is the state of compensation here at the organization right now? So at the institution, what are the systems and policies you have in place that govern how the different employee groups are compensated, and really assess whether or not there is an issue of compression and to what degree that issue exists. And so the president mentioned before that we were tasked with looking, does compression exist? And we would define salary compression as having a longer tenured employee or a longer standing employee with the university, having a salary very similar to somebody who would be brand new to the organization. And that would be within the same area overall. Understanding that across different disciplines there would be variation, but within the same discipline, you should generally see employees with more experience at a different salary than those that are brand new. And so to what degree are we seeing those salaries collapsed against one another? And then after that, we'll talk about the market analysis. And so we did an external market comparison of salaries here at the university versus other institutions of comparable size, comparable services offered in terms of disciplines that they offer, similar settings within their regions, as well as we did look nationally as well at a comparison of salaries. And then beyond that, we'll talk about what did we find in that market survey, what were the assumptions we had to operate under in order to make assessments there, as well as get into what are our recommendations to the university at this time, where they stand, and really a little bit about what the next steps would be for the university if they are going to be able to act on any of the recommendations. So we'll talk a little bit about the study process itself and what were the various steps that we had to take. The very first step is to perform a comprehensive review of everything you have in place now, assessing, do you have formalized compensation structures? How are salaries determined here at Morgan? How have they been done historically? What are the policies that really accompany all of that, and determine where are the major gaps? Where are the opportunities for improvement in the system, just from a structural standpoint of how you are today, rather than even looking at how you compare to others. Beyond that, really the next step in that process is to take that external look at the market survey, assess what is your competitive position on salaries right now, determine how big that gap is, if there is a gap, and what's the variation in the gap to the market across your different areas. And so we looked at both faculty and exempt staff in this process, and so we assessed how close are exempt staff with regards to market competitiveness, how competitive are faculty salaries right now, and across all the various disciplines as well, understanding that there's going to be variation in market demand for the skill sets that are required by professors to teach on the different disciplines. What is that differing market position across all those different disciplines? Once we had an idea of where you guys stand vis-a-vis the market, once we had an understanding of what your current strengths and weaknesses were, that's when we were able to develop recommendations for the university as to here's the best course of action from a structural standpoint that you guys can enact across the university that would enable you to be more competitive than you are today and enable you to tackle those issues of compression where we did find them. And so now I'll start talking about the findings on compression and the findings on the market. So in the assessment of current conditions, there's a couple of very big takeaways about your current way of compensating here in the university. The first item with that is that you don't actually have a formalized structure for determining pay for most of the university. You do have it for the non-exempt employees, but for your exempt staff and your faculty, there is no structured way to say that a professor in this discipline at this rank is going to make between this dollar amount and that dollar amount. Historically, it's been a more open-ended system here, and that's not uncommon to find in organizations. Every institution or organization of any type will usually start at this point, where we don't have a formalized system for determining where pay would fall between a given range. But ultimately, as the university has grown and become much more complex over time, you have more and more disciplines. As the president mentioned, you have a higher and higher enrollment numbers. There's a greater demand for that need for structure, and so it's a little bit more deterministic, a better way for employees to understand where should they fall in the structure, what can their expectations be about compensation here at the university, not just at the beginning of the career, but over the long haul as well. Beyond that, we did, in order to assess whether or not salaries were compressed on top of one another, because you lacked any formalized minimum or maximums to a pay range for different positions, we had to establish what those ranges would look like in order to assess, well, how close are positions relative to one another really if we don't have an upper and minimum boundary. And so the next piece that we performed, where we looked at the market and we were able to understand what are the prevailing market wages for these jobs that we looked at, that's what enabled us to assess, does compression here exist at the university? And the answer is yes, that there are many parts of both the faculty and staff side that have compression that have occurred over time. It's not something that every single employee in the organization is impacted the same way and by the same amount. But naturally, because you haven't had that defined structure over time, you have inevitably, there has been some issues occurring where employees were maybe brought in at more advanced salaries relative to others in their discipline, or it's potential that in salaries increased more dramatically than others. And so those types of things ideally would be corrected over the long term and when the university is able to tackle them. The next thing I want to talk about is that market information. So I've mentioned a few times about an external market survey designed to establish what is the competitive position of compensation here at the university. In order to do this, the methodology taken is a primary market survey first and foremost. And so we actually worked with a committee, a compensation study committee made of administrators, faculty, and staff members that helped contribute to us on what are the institutions we should be benchmarking against? Who should Morgan be stacked up against in terms of saying this is the market, these are the institutions we want to see, how are we competitive are we against, are we doing things similarly to them? We want to make sure that this is the baseline of what we want to be compared to. And so there were 25 universities that were identified through that process. Of those, 10 of them were able to participate fully in the survey process, provide us all the wealth of information that we needed. So we thank those universities very much because it's all on a voluntary basis that they provided that information. And then in addition to that primary market survey designed at comparing your salaries against those other universities, we also did leverage some national secondary source data, specifically from Cooper HR, which is the leading source on secondary education compensation information. They do nationwide surveys every single year for community colleges and universities, private, both public and private, and they look at what is the state of compensation across the country. And so we would use both primary data from the universities listed behind me, as well as from national sources across the country. I'm sorry, what was that? I apologize, I can't quite make that out. Oh, sorry, there should have been on the previous slide. Sorry. Sure, it's a little small. The universities that were able to participate was UMBC, North Carolina University A&T, Portland State University, Georgia State University, University of Wisconsin, University of Missouri, UNC Charlotte, University of Massachusetts, Boston, University of Illinois, Chicago, Baltimore County, and Baltimore County Public Schools. Obviously, those last two would have been more of a comparison for the staff side rather than the faculty, of course. The faculty, that utilization of that Cooper HR data was very important, given that they look at faculty salaries across the entire country. So, based on that methodology and going out to the market, there's a few assumptions and findings that really came from this that are important to share. And so the first is, because you lack a salary structure defined right now, we're not able to make a one-to-one structural comparison between what the market average is and where Morgan's at. So we can't say your salary start at this amount and their start at this amount and this is the gap, because there is no structured way to where your salaries start for a given position for exempt and faculty. And so really we have to do a base pay comparison from that standpoint, and there was a gap identified through that. So we did find that right now Morgan is lagging the market in salaries for both exempt staff and faculty on a base pay standpoint. But what's going to be important is moving forward, once the university is able to adopt a formalized structure, is monitoring how are you comparing structurally in the long run, rather than looking at base pay itself, because average base pay has a lot more variable, as you can imagine, based on individual circumstance. I'm sorry, someone's going to have to forward that question up here. I apologize, I don't have those figures with me up front today on the PowerPoint. We do have, one of the things I wanted to make sure I mentioned today is we do have a formal report that's going to be provided and up on HR's website, which gets into all the details, and will have a lot more exhibits, kind of the charts and figures between all the comparison. And it'll detail out, what were those percentage gaps for the different employee groups, as well as it'll go into more detail about the methodology we undertook, and that should be up on HR's website within the next couple of days. So the next thing I wanted to speak to is what we've then designed for the university to consider. And so we've given the university a couple of options to look at right now. And the most important thing that we're recommending, even though we've got a slew of recommendations for the university, the first and foremost would be to ideally establish a set of pay ranges for all groups of employees. While they do have that for non-exempt employees, we believe that structured setup should be extended to all groupings. And so that would mean adopting formalized salary ranges for all faculty members and for all exempt staff. And given that this would be the first time the university would be doing this, we have given some alternatives to consider. And so in the case of exempt staff, we've proposed two different widely varying options to the university, where one would be a more broadband approach, where compensation would be determined a little bit more flexibly between a larger range of pay, and there would be a smaller number of pay bands, so to speak, that positions would then fall under. And then there's a little bit more of a deterministic approach where there's a higher number of pay ranges that are more discrete in nature, that are a little bit smaller, and that helps with more discretely identifying for a certain type of labor, where should it fall in the university relative to all others. And so we've made preliminary recommendations as well on how positions should fall across those ranges. And so every single position in the organization would then be assigned to a subsequent range in either of the two alternative structures. In the case of the faculty, we've designed something a little bit different altogether. We've tried to give Morgan something that most of the because you're not this is the first time you're coming to the table on establishing a structure, we're trying to not set you up where universities have designed themselves 10, 20 years ago when they first adopted this. We wanted to bring you something a little bit more cutting edge in nature and something that would make you more viable and more competitive in the market long term for all disciplines. And so for faculty, we've recommended a structure where pay ranges would actually be variable by the discipline that you're located within. A lot of organizations will choose to adopt to formally have single set pay ranges for all faculty regardless of discipline, and they have found that over time that has not enabled them to be more competitive for those areas of disciplines where the market has continued to move at a more significant rate. So I know our keynote speaker has a fondness for STEM. That would be an area where we've seen significant market movement over time. Nursing is another one where nursing schools throughout the country are facing shortages for nursing faculty because the amount you have to pay to get nursing faculty to get them out of the hospital and into a classroom is very difficult. And so by having a dynamic pay plan that allows you to be more agile on how you would compensate for the different disciplines is a very important aspect that we think we're bringing forward with this recommendation. There are a few other supplemental recommendations that we have that are very important as well outside of the most obvious structural adoptions. Beyond that, we are recommending some supplemental items in order for the university to really move forward with this proposal and for them to seriously consider adopting it and maintaining these structures over time. We do think they need to hire an additional HR staff who is specialized in compensation administration. It's something that while there are many individuals in HR who are competent and capable in the ways of dealing with compensation at the university now, and bringing a new program on board, it's a very big undertaking, and having somebody who's dedicated to maintaining that pretty much full time is very important in any university of this size. And so for the college to move to that structured approach, it's very important that they bring in that additional resource to do so. In addition to that, we recommend that to tackle compression, that once the university has established that they're going to adopt the pay ranges, that they've established the final assignments of where everybody would fall within those pay ranges, that at that point that compression be addressed through a realignment of salaries throughout the ranges, and that employee salaries be reviewed relative to their years of service, or in the case of faculty, their years of tenure, and looking at how long have they been in their current role, how long have they been operating that capacity with the university, and making sure that they are appropriately placed throughout the range relative to that. And so we've begun that modeling and giving some of those models over to the university, but ultimately that would all have to be revisited if and when the university is able to adopt the structures more formally. Oh, sorry, one back again. Thanks. In addition to that, we do have a few other supplemental recommendations I want to make note of. With this type of study, this isn't something where you do it once and that's the end of it. You don't have to ever revisit it again, that you've gotten over that hurdle. This is the type of study that requires ongoing maintenance, ongoing administration forever. All organizations should be monitoring the state of their compensation, at least in some form on an annual basis, but in a more formalized and studious approach, every 3 to 5 years, we recommend the university revisit this type of study, even if it's a little bit smaller in scope, that it looks at assessing what is our market position 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, and understanding that are we still maintaining the same market position that we wanted to establish in the first place by adopting these structures. And then beyond that, we recommend that there would be some updating to the current policies with regards to hiring rates and moving employees through the salary range as well, and to ensure alignment with the adoption of the new structures. So if the university is able to adopt what we're recommending from a structural standpoint, ensuring the success of that maintenance over time would mean that policies and procedures need to be updated as well, so that when somebody gets hired in, the whole system's not thrown out of whack. All the work that you've gone into realignment isn't thrown out the window right away, but it's something that you can carry forward and keep moving in perpetuity. So those are all the major recommendations that we had. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but if there is time, I'd be happy to take any other questions that you guys do have.
Since the final report will be posted on the HR website very, very soon, were you going to did you want to entertain just a couple of questions? Okay.
Market as the cause behind gender disparities pay, but even men in these other fields outside of engineering and business would be impacted by this history of certain fields that were predominated by men earning more than fields that weren't predominated by men. So what are we doing as an institution to understand how that history of gender imbalance in certain fields impacts how we are getting paid today?
Well, I do want to clarify one thing first with that. It's a very valid comment, and you're right. Historically, those fields have been dominated by men, which is a very important historical context to keep in mind. One thing I want to make sure there's clarification on is we weren't the same consultants that did the gender equity study a couple years back. We were a secondary firm that was brought in after the fact to work specifically on compensation. So I can't speak to the results of the gender equity study, and it wasn't something that we were looking at within this study. Our understanding was that that study found no major systemic issues, and so that's why we were then brought in as almost like a stage 2 to then assess whether or not there was compression or market issues and to look at that. And you're right, that certain disciplines, because they have higher volume of men versus women, that can then raise the concern about whether or not there are gender inequities. But that's why, I guess from a more theoretical standpoint, it's so important to have higher degree of involvement of all groupings of individuals in things such as STEM or in business in the long term. But I wouldn't be able to speak to, in our study, whether or not we found that that was a systemic issue or anything. I would have to defer to the findings of previous consultants with another firm, and when they did a much more comprehensive look at that we didn't do.
Thank you for your question. I think that that was an excellent question, and at some point, I think that we will have to, begin to address that issue. As you know, it is a systemic, historical, and global issue when it comes to differences in disciplines and pay that are predominated by men or women. So thank you for the question. One more question, please.
Okay. How would this study affect a faculty who's been working for 30 years, who has received about a 1% raise in pay per year, and doesn't have any retirement benefits? I can see how this study affects new people coming in, but how about old people?
Did you get the question?
Yeah, I think so. It would, for those longer-term employees, if we identified that a longer-term faculty member or an exempt staff member for that matter, because we did the same analysis for both groupings, was not at the pay level we would have expected given their years of experience and given what their years of service within their current role at the university, that would have been one of the areas that we would have identified that was experiencing that compression. And so we have produced a model to the university and that's detailed more in the report that you can take a look at, that looks at what it would be to space that out, what would it be to address some of that compression based on the model that we presented so far. That's by no means the be-all, end-all only solution for the university. It's simply this is one way of approaching it. So I believe that speaks a little bit to that. Now, in terms of historically, I can't speak to anything on retro pay or anything along those lines. That generally speaking, organizations, when they experience pay challenges over time, they can only try to move forward and tackle the issues on a moving forward basis. That unfortunately they can only do so much on actions that happened previously.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your report. I think that we all will understand that it will take us some time to digest the specifics of the report and the analysis on pay compression, and there will be multiple opportunities for the president and the senior staff to address some of these issues, HR and finance and management. But I think that we also should be very clear that all of these issues will not be addressed immediately or tomorrow, but we will be taking a very hard look at it and really trying to address it, as you've seen from the work that we've done to really get a handle on what the issues are. So thank you very much, for the presentation. And while we're asking Dr. Malcolm to make our way up here, please stand up and get your circulation going and stretch out if you need to. You've been sitting for quite a while. If you feel like doing that, please do so. Dr. Malcolm? May I have your attention? May I have your attention, please? I did want to mention that at this point, staff is free to leave and to return this afternoon at 4:30. You are free to stay if you'd like to. Thank you very much. Okay. Ready? Let's please have a seat. So you can. Okay, hello, break's over. Please take a seat. Dr. Shirley Malcolm has asked us not to read her bio. It is included in the program if you want to know more about her vast experience. However, she is currently the Director of Education and Human Resources for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I think the President mentioned the really, really important part of why she's here today is she has served as on the Morgan State University Board of Regents for over 20 years. And I have certainly come to know her within the context of serving as dean and more recently in my current role. And what Dr. Wilson said is absolutely true. She is an extraordinary advocate for faculty. She is always seeing things within the lens of academics, and she is not at all shy about calling to the attention of the board and the president, her thoughts about how things benefit the academic arena. And so, Dr. Malcolm, thank you very much. We are so thrilled to have you here to share with us. And we've been having some conversations that were quite provocative and interesting about innovations in teaching. So welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I think it's my pleasure to be here. I'm kind of the comic relief, for this particular point in the program. How many of you have ever seen The Godfather? Okay, this is good. I have an older group. All right. So for the younger people, you really need to basically check out The Godfather. Can I have my first slide, please? There is a point where Don Corleone says, "I'll make him an offer he can't refuse." Now, given that we're talking about a bunch of mobsters, we understood that the offer he couldn't refuse was an offer he couldn't refuse. Now, in this particular case, I was asked if I would talk about innovation in teaching, and the reason for this is in part because I made the mistake and let it slip that I had spoken at Teach Week at Caltech. I'm a trustee at Caltech. And so Dr. Wilson and Dr. McFadden just kind of jumped on that. Like I can't treat my institutions differently, like your children, right? And so asked if I would think about giving a presentation here at Morgan. Now, the difference is that at Caltech is basically a STEM institution. So that means that I could give all of my STEM examples, I could talk about teaching in STEM. You have to understand, we are notoriously bad teachers in STEM. Our reputation precedes us. And it tends to be the case that my folks tend to do a lot of lecturing, not as much active teaching as we should be. And so it was an opportunity to talk a little bit about how to clean up our act. But here at Morgan, it's a little bit different. You're not just people who are in biology or engineering or chemistry or what have you. You include people from all the disciplines. So that's a real challenge for me because basically, I am what I am. And that's the lens that I actually bring to this discussion. On the other hand, thank goodness I was liberally educated. So I'm interested in some of everything. I even sang in the choir, Dr. Conway, okay? I understand that, in fact, in addition to being a wonderful composer, Alexander Borodin was also a chemist, a quite accomplished chemist. So I'm okay with regard to those kinds of things. But I wanted to try to find themes that would work across all fields, because innovation in teaching really shouldn't be about what the field is. It really has to be about the learners. And that's one of the things that I decided, and that is that basically our students connect us all. And so I want to talk about learner-centered teaching. And the other thing that I want to talk about is crossing borders. If I could have the next slide. John Gardner was an amazing man, John W. Gardner. John was an old-time Republican who served in the Democratic administration of Lyndon Johnson. But prior to that time, John had been the head of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the president, but he was also the head of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. That's that structure that, in fact, does the ratings that Dr. Wilson was talking about. They created that. What a lot of people don't know is that Carnegie also founded or gave the money, the seed money for TIAA. And so there's lots of kind of interesting connections. But John Gardner was an amazing person, but he said this, and I really relate this to learner-centered teaching. Much education today is monumentally ineffective. All too often we're giving young people cut flowers when we should be teaching them to grow their own plants. And I think that this notion of learner-centered is really one that I want to bear down on with regard to our conversation here this morning. The other issue is that of crossing borders. There is a challenge now, and I'm glad that President Wilson introduced that theme, the challenge and opportunity of interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and convergence. Because this is where knowledge application is going. And so essentially, if we don't give our students the ability to cross disciplines all the time and reassemble ideas, then we are shortchanging them, because that's the world they're going to have to interact in. And so the question then becomes, well, what about how do we relate to this as scholars? Or how do I relate to it as a region? Because quite frankly, Dr. Wilson, alluded to the fact I'm a STEM person, and yet right now I'm basically spending much of my time dealing with budgets and leases and legal aspects. And I saw this notion of faculty as learners. I think that is another one that must be central to the way that we are having this discussion. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to ask if I can just have random people come up to the mic for just a second. I only want 4 people, but 1 at each mic, please. Come on, I won't bite. Okay, go to a mic. Find a mic. Anybody. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and you can change the slide now, because everybody can answer this question, right? Do you remember that one special teacher? And come up to the mic and tell me who that was in your life. We all have at least one. Some cases we have more than one. Okay, who was that person for you? Yes, who was that person for you? Anything, it can be elementary school, it can be high school. Who was that teacher for you? Say what your name is in your field, but say who that teacher was. Okay, just take mine.
I'm Omari Jackson, and I'm a faculty member over in the School of Education in the Department of Advanced Studies. Mr. Moore, he was a civics teacher in middle school in Detroit, Michigan. He reminded me a lot of my parents. He was like a Southern raised guy. My parents are from the South. He was hard on us, but he loved us.
Okay, you could come to my mic. It's okay, I don't mind walking. I get my exercise.
I'm Coleman Jordan in the Department of Architecture, and my professor that made a difference for me was John Regan. He was at Ohio State University when I was in school for undergrad. John Regan. His name's John Regan. Why? Because he believed in me. That's really why. He supported the work. He saw that I did something. So actually, he was the one, before I even thought about teaching, was the one that said, you know what, you should be a teacher. And hadn't even thought about it, so.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. My name is Dr. Deanna Bailey. I'm a new hire at the School of Engineering. One of my favorite teachers, I'm actually with her here today, is Dr. Michelle Reese. She's the reason why I actually pursued my doctorate because of her. She graduated in 2003. She was the first female to graduate from the School of Engineering with a doctorate. And I was graduating with my bachelor's, and I remember she was sitting in front of me, and I tapped her on the shoulder, and I said, Doc, you know what? I said, if you can do it, I can do it. So I'm here with my favorite teacher today, Dr. Michelle Reese.
Okay, all right, our last volunteer here.
Thank you. My name is Felicia Thomas. I'm in the history department here at Morgan State. A lot of special teachers, but the one I'll mention, her name is Patricia Terry Ross. She was a music teacher at Cass Technical High School in Detroit, Michigan. And she was also the director of harp and vocal, in which I sang for 3 years. She was my favorite teacher because she was excellent, and she demanded excellence from us. She was very tough on us, but she motivated us to do our best, and I will never forget her for it.
You have made my point. All of you. None of you talked about because the person was easy on you. None of you said, well, they basically, thought that they would just pass me through. The point is that we remember the people who expect a lot of us. We remember the people who believe in us, and we remember the people basically who urge us forward and give us the tools to move forward. And next slide. That's what we have to be. And that's really what we have to infuse with regard to innovative teaching. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. And I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And I tell you this because we take ourselves into our classrooms. And so this is the self that I am, the little one, okay? If I had had me as a first child, I would not have had a second child. I was willful and curious and lots of things. But, what they say, what you see is what you get. And I do remember teachers. I have teachers that I remember as well. My mother. I remember my mother as a teacher. Next slide. I remember my mother as a teacher. My mother taught 3rd grade. The reason is that every child who left my mother's class left a reader. Now, you know how difficult that is. 3rd grade is absolutely pivotal. The people who understand elementary education understand that you move from learning to read to reading to learn. And if you can't get at that point, you have a problem. And so I think that this notion, I wondered, how in the world did she do that? Next slide. Those are my parents, That's my mother, the third grade teacher wonder, and that's my dad at my commencement. Next slide. The next person I want to recognize is Mr. Smoot. Mr. Smoot was a science teacher, and he encouraged our interest in science. I came out during the time, this was 7th grade, and I came out during the time of Sputnik. And under those kinds of circumstances, everybody was kind of paying attention to the sciences at that time. And so he encouraged that. But the other person that I want to talk about is Miss Goddard. She emphasized excellence and supporting us via peer learning. Now, Miss Goddard was tough. And the thing is that I was probably one of the best students in her class, but she felt that I had bad habits. And my bad habits was I was not a very good speller. And to this day, because of Miss Goddard, I'm the best copy proofreader in the office. The spelling, the grammar, etc. You basically get these things from these teachers and you remember them. Miss Goddard had almost 40 kids in her class, and she came to a group of us and said, I cannot move you as fast as you can go. And so she put us in the back of the room and told us to just keep going and to help each other. So when you start to think about these things, next slide, you remember what it is to basically be an innovative teacher. I mean, they would call that innovative now, okay? But that was back when. And so we start to think, well, what are we talking about with regard to innovation? Next slide. I show you these pictures because context matters. I lived in a place called Collegeville, which was a poor neighborhood where Bethel Baptist Church was located. I experienced my first bombing at age 10. We were awakened to a bomb blast on Christmas night of 1956. So that it transfixes a lot of things for you. And in my case, I think that I'm represented by those two things, and that is the civil rights movement at the time in Birmingham and Sputnik. Next slide. This is a slide this is a picture that I first saw in Spike Lee's Four Little Girls. The top picture, just part of the top picture, that's my grandmother hugging Reverend Shuttlesworth after finding out that, in fact, that he and his family did, in fact, survive the bombing. And I saw it. I told everybody, yes, that was my grandmother. The only problem was that, it was just kind of flicked by very quickly. But when Reverend Shuttlesworth died, they had this segment on Hail and Farewell on CBS. And one of the things that appeared was this clip. So when it finally came on YouTube, I basically sat and watched it because I wanted to show everybody that indeed was Mama, and it really was Mama. The only thing was that I had not seen before 10-year-old me in the corner. So this moment of witnessing history, it changes you. It affects the way you look at the world. Next slide. I finished George Washington Carver High School in 1963. Yes, I am over 70. I get all the discounts now. But we had no prom. We were under martial law. Many of my classmates basically went to jail because, and then they said that they couldn't graduate, but Dr. King went to court, in federal court in Atlanta, so that it was possible for them to graduate. Next slide. Next, I want to introduce my Aunt Bessie. She was a long-term educator in the Birmingham Public Schools, and then decided to switch fields and became the first African-American woman who was elected to the Birmingham City Council. And as I said to people, her role as a former principal was absolutely appropriate for her role on the City Council. Next slide. I went to the University of Washington. I found another Husky who was in the audience. The University of Washington was so different than Birmingham, you just cannot imagine, than my life in Birmingham. And so I did experience a culture shock. Next slide. I was the only, just about everywhere I went, there weren't young women in class, there weren't black students anywhere. The counselor basically said, well, because I wasn't getting all A's, well, heck, look at the schools and the facilities that we had to come from, that I should not think about the possibility of applying to medical school because I was a pre-med major. My English teacher was surprised that I could write it all. Implicit bias. You have to understand that in many cases when they see you, people make assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of doing. And I think this is a lesson that we can't just focus on that. And I think that this is a learner-centered aspect as well. Next slide. Learner-centered teaching. Our students do not come to us as blank slates. There is no tabula rasa thing going on. They basically have had all kinds of experiences. When I showed up at the University of Washington, I had had experiences that were beyond what any of my classmates could possibly have imagined. Now, what did that mean about me? And that was the question I had to ask, but also my faculty, the faculty who taught me. Do not assume what learners do or do not know. Just because they had a course, it doesn't mean that they understand the data and the concepts that come from that course. There is often a need for explicit skill instruction. Do not just assume that a student knows how to study, knows how to formulate hypotheses, knows how to evaluate evidence. Don't make any of those assumptions. There are advantages to collaborative learning in diverse environments where people are giving of each other. And probably most importantly, the more real, the better. And next slide. So, what do we know about our students that might inform our teaching? How can we determine what they understand and what they want to know? What do they know how to do? And what do they need to learn how to do? And to a certain extent, we can only find these things out by asking them. And so the question is, how do we get to know our students? Next slide. So when we talk about learner-centeredness, might we accomplish this? In some cases, people pass out little surveys. You don't have to put your name on it, but to know what students are aspiring to, where did they come from, what classes have they had, all of these things that can give us more insight into how we should structure our classes and the pacing of our classes and how we can basically look at the kind of the assignments that associate. Many people are doing flipped classrooms now. So in some cases, they're asking students for essays. And you don't just have to ask that. You don't have to just ask for an autobiography in an English class. You can basically ask, what is your relationship to any field in any class to try to get a sense of this. Seminars, students as teachers, giving them the opportunity to share what they know with others. Different forms of assessment. In one case, I asked students, at the point where I was teaching, I asked them about giving me a brief video. So there are many ways to be able to assess. Project-based learning, service learning, and a lot more ideas that are out here. Next slide. So there are special challenges with regard to large classes. Like right now, I feel a lot of pressure because there are a lot of people here and you're spread out. But when you start thinking about it, there are opportunities to try to do this and to do it with and without technology. You may not have clickers because we don't have classrooms that are set up with that type of technology. But I had in one case where people had laser pointers that they handed out to the students, and they would focus, they would give multiple examples up here, and the students could shine their lasers on the ones that they thought were correct. Or hold up different colored papers. So there's all kinds of ways to be able to do this. Stopping midway to exchange ideas, to process ideas, and to integrate ideas, or to figure out what it is that you don't know. The learning sciences basically say that at some point your registers get full, and you need a way to be able to integrate. A focus on concepts. And I think that this is an absolutely critical one. If people understand the concepts, they can basically find the rest of the information that they might need or be able to put things together. And the other is a little bit touchy because it means the issue of observing each other or taking each other's classes that may be outside of your own field. It addresses this learning issue, but it also, you can basically give feedback, what I didn't understand about what you did today, so that there are ways to be able to do it. And then making it real, building a bank of metaphors and examples that can go across students with a large variety of diverse backgrounds. Next slide. I want to introduce you to these guys because I did have the time to know them. They were both in the zoology department at the University of Washington. Alan Cohn, I got to know because we did field trips, natural history of marine invertebrates, and we would go and we would be together 3 days on the weekend, multiple times during class. And I get motion sick, so I rode shotgun with him, and I was the one with the maps. But the point is, he came to know me as a person, and I was very honored when I went back for my 51st anniversary of my own graduation to give the graduation speech for the department, that he was the person who introduced me. So 51 years later, after he has basically sent me out into the world, he was the person who said, why not go to graduate school? He was the person who basically supported that dream. And Bob Payne, who is here, who is a quite famous ecologist. Bob Payne, I TA'd for Bob Payne when I was an undergraduate. And for him to support that and to be really encouraging of the way that I thought and what have you, it's important. Okay, I'm going to speed this along now. Next slide. I want to talk about the intersections because I talked about learner-centered, and I hope you begin to understand now what we're talking about in terms of learner-centered. That is active engagement with students. Active engagement with students. Now, let's talk about the intersections. Okay, next slide. You know this guy, Leonardo, okay? And what people don't tend to focus on is that Leonardo was both a scientist slash engineer slash inventor on the one hand and an artist on the other. Next slide. And the thing that I think that we have to do is to say to ourselves, why do we have to choose? Why are we in this bucket or that bucket or the other bucket? We are many aspects to ourselves. And so, in fact, this gives us affirming for students that they don't have to make these kinds of choices, I think is really, really important. Just because you major in something, you don't have to do that. I don't do STEM, I don't do the STEM that I was prepared to do. I do a whole bunch of other things. So, next slide. We talk about, in engineering talks about T-shaped skills. You often hear that where you talk about the disciplinary expertise and then the generalized knowledge. And the generalized knowledge would be things like communicating, writing, etc. But increasingly, as the problems become more complicated, we have to start talking about pie-shaped people with deep expertise in more than one field, or cone-shaped people with even deeper expertise in a lot of fields. And that will allow them to be able to operate in those kinds of settings where they have to either not necessarily contribute to the scholarship, but at least understand the scholarship of their colleagues. Next slide. The world has basically settled on this set of goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as the way to think about and address the problems that we have, both in the developed and the developing world. And these are big goals, things like eradicating poverty and addressing food security and aspects like this. But you don't solve those problems with disciplinary thinking, and you don't solve the problems by just focusing on one field alone. Next slide. Now, I raise this, I point this as an issue because every time you have a breakthrough, you often have consequences. And in the case of the Industrial Revolution, which allowed higher standards of living for people and things like that, there were consequences to the Industrial Revolution. And that is, if you will see this huge rise here of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, basically that's contributing to the climate change that we are seeing today. So the issue is, all right, the technology may create a problem, these changes create a problem. Now, these changes basically this thinking has to be deployed to solve the problem and begin to address these issues, which are in fact global. Next slide. I add this slide for the historians. We talk about Russia a lot, and Russian Revolution, and a lot of people don't really understand the connection between the Russian Revolution and really a genetic mutation. Queen Victoria had a mutation for hemophilia that she passed all over the royal families in Europe. And I think that next slide, the idea was that because some historians believe that Rasputin was able to gain such close relationship to the Romanovs because of his relationship with the Tsarina in terms of calming this son who was a hemophiliac. So, but he dipped over into the politics. He wasn't just the mystic who calmed the son. He dipped over into the politics and began to breed distrust among the people that contributed to the Russian Revolution. Now, I raise this because most of the history classes I'd ever had that talked about the Russian Revolution never, ever talked about the science that was related to it. I might have been more interested in it. I wasn't really into it, but I am now, because I began to understand that the stories that are there are much more robust and fulsome than we knew. Next slide. I have a different view of World War II. You know, you just think about people basically running around shooting at each other and forming bunkers and what have you. But if you look at and think about the war, there were technologies all during this that have basically enabled the Allies to be successful within World War II. But we don't tend to hear about this. You see this thing, the proximity fuse. Most people don't know that actually Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab has a very major role in the story that relates to the proximity fuse, and it's just right down the street. Radar, you know, the Enigma machine, the code breaking, and Alan Turing. Some of you know this because of the movie The Imitation Game. And weather forecasting. Give me the next slide. During their ride to the Capitol for his inauguration, where John Kennedy asked Eisenhower about why the Normandy invasion was so successful, and his comment was that he had better meteorologists than the Germans. Not better guns, but better meteorologists. Because when they invaded was basically more important than what happened, because it in fact allowed them to be able to come in at a time when they were more likely to be successful. Okay, next slide. I think that in a lot of cases, our students just don't have a vantage point with regard to their field. We just kind of dive in without telling them what it is about. And I think that in many cases, they need that view from 30,000 feet in order to be able to want to get down into the weeds, and that there is an opportunity there to really bring them along. Next slide. GPS, all of your phones have them, right? The smartphones, okay. But a lot of people don't know the history of GPS or how it's related to Sputnik, that in fact, there were scientists who were on the top of who were up on the top of the lab at Applied Physics Lab, listening to Sputnik. And they came to a realization that given the Doppler shift that indicated where they were in that passage, that they could, in fact, if they knew where the satellite was, they could figure out where they were on the ground. And the APL, being a Navy facility, it was important for your submarines to be able to figure out where they were. So you were able to push that R&D forward, but now that technology is available to all of us and keeps all of us from getting lost. These creative collisions, I think, are things that are absolutely amazing, and we have to begin to provide opportunities for our students to get this. Next slide. I'm going to go really fast now. I do want to tell you this story, though, because it involves your president. What he didn't tell you was that I chaired the search committee that brought President Wilson here. And we were meeting prior to his actually coming here. And I was so excited about this book that I had read, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And I said to the president, you really have to read this. You really have to read it. And he, you know how it is. I'm a regent. I chaired his search committee. He humored me. Okay, he said that he would read it. And I think that he opened it up with the expectation it was one of these kind of dry stem books. But when you do open it up, what you find out it is not a dry stem book, that it is a book about health, it's about health disparities, it's about a lot of things. It's about ethics, it's about an amazing family who basically is right down the street, who has an odyssey, who went through an odyssey with regard to their own lives. I want to introduce you to the next slide. On the next slide, I want to introduce you to an artist that I had not known about, William Udermohlen. Okay? Can you just keep the slides going on this? Okay. Now, what you're looking at is Udermohlen's descent into dementia. Hold it right there. Essentially, he drew those paintings of himself as his Alzheimer's basically became worse and worse and worse. I discovered this when a student presented a poster. One of the students presented a poster at Caltech, and what the student did was to talk about the actual delivery of particles that could address the plaque that builds up in Alzheimer's. but you have to basically do it directly into the brain because of the brain-blood barrier, or to try to find something that could cross the brain-blood barrier in terms of getting into there to deliver the medications. Okay, go on. Next. All right, stop. Now, these are scans of the brain at different stages in Alzheimer's. Give me the next slide. Late scan, late picture. It's as though he is basically giving us a window into his brain. Now, for this, I found this incredibly profound because it gave me an idea about how to introduce these issues to people in very different kinds of ways. If I go and slap those brain images up there, a whole bunch of people are going to just be turned off immediately because they won't get it. They won't understand that what you're looking at is really the loss of activity in the brain over time. And instead, that artistry basically tells us a lot more profound story. Next slide. So I said at the beginning in my title that we would find the future by going to the past. Mother's third grade class where every child basically learned to read, Mr. Smoot's drawing on contemporary examples so that he could teach everybody the problem solving that actually went into helping those individuals, helping the satellite get into space and then the individuals get into space. And then Ms. Goddard's focus on collaboration and excellence. The next slide, let's skip that. The next slide. And the next one. This tends to be our response to increasing knowledge. We want to just ram everything in. And I think at some point you have to step back and start to figure out what you need to take out, not what you need to put in, and to really think about how to rethink our work and what is core, what is central that everybody has to have, and what they can learn on their own, which is where we're trying to get them anyway. Next slide. Why do we teach? I think that we have to stop and think about why we teach. Yes, we want to share our discipline, our passion. We want to help people become good citizens. And we want to help students find meaning. And I think that by helping them find a different way of thinking, that we can begin to help them find meaning, because they can put together the people that they are into the things that they want to study and where they want to develop their scholarship. Next. Give me the next slide and the next one. Okay. We all bring a lot of different things to our teaching and to our classroom. Who we are as people, what we have been through, how we see the world, and we're better served if we do this. But it's not just what we bring, but it's also what we bring out of our students. And I think that's really the opportunity with regard to learner-centered instruction. Last slide. I really was trained in the, next slide. I really was trained in the liberal arts. So you don't get away without Chaucer. I hadn't really appreciated Chaucer. This is The Clerk. The Clerk is really, I started reading as a graduate student, advanced student of natural philosophy, which is really what they call physics at the time. And I would just read the last part here. Of study took he utmost care and heed. Not one word spoke he more than was his need. And that was said in fullest reverence, and short and quick and full of high good sense. Pregnant of moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And I do not think that in fact, that we can in fact teach if we do not indeed continue to learn. Thank you.
I'm sorry I took so long.
Wow. That was very, very chilling. There are a few things that I want to remember, just to repeat. Care enough about our students to expect and push them to do their best. The value of the experiences that students bring into the classroom. Making assumptions about students based on who they are and how they present. These are things we don't want to do.
No.
There are numerous and extremely creative ways to reach students where they are and move them to where we want them to be. Active engagement with student learners and learner-centered, and don't try to solve large, complex societal problems within the silo of one discipline. And there were numerous examples of how you do that. And this one really got me because I do it all the time. That overstuffed curriculum, y'all do that? That overstuff, because they got to know this, I got to tell them that, I got to teach them this. They must know, and I'll certainly remember that. And then what?
Google is faster.
Google is faster, it's true. And always, always, always remember why we teach. And the real reason is to get our students to think differently about a lot of things. Thank you so very, very much. That was very, very good. Indeed, thank you. And we had turn around, don't leave that. You know, we like to give little things, gifts, as a token of our appreciation for an extremely powerful, profound, and impactful presentation.
I don't think that I can accept it.
Why?
Conflict of interest. How much is it?
$30.
Okay. How
All right.
much did it cost?
$30.
Okay, all right. I'm good. I'm real bad about this, okay?
And this reads, University Appreciation Award, presented to Dr. Shirley M. Malcolm, keynote speaker, Fall 28 Faculty Institute, and it's presented by Dr. Wilson. You should come up here and get in the picture. Since you're presenting this, in recognition of your outstanding contributions and inspiring address, Morgan State University, August the 8th, 2018. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Oops, let's step over here and get a picture.
He's trained me well.
That's pretty awesome. We're going to have 3 minutes from the vice presidents. And we don't want you to tell us everything. We just want you to give us a couple of things that make us think differently. That will be Mr. Sidney Evans, the Vice President for Finance and Management, followed by Dr. Kevin Banks, the Vice President for the Division of Student Affairs, and Dr. Willie May, the Vice President for the Division of Research and Economic Development. And Dr. May is going to go first because if he doesn't get to DC, he doesn't get a passport. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, good morning, all. I have prepared some slides, but I'm not going to use them. First, I'd like to tell everyone, didn't you really enjoy that message from my homegirl? As it turns out, I grew up in Birmingham the same time that Shirley did, the same time that Freeman Hrabowski did. We were all Bamas at the same time. And what Shirley doesn't know is that I was Mr. Goodson's favorite student before you were at Finley Elementary School before he went to Carver. One thing in common for all of us is that we had teachers who would not allow us to fail. I mean, I got my behind beat because I was a good student. Because in the community I grew up with, and that wasn't a big deal, was how great an athlete you were. And I worked hard at that. But they also would not let any of us slack. And it's because of that that I'm here now. And I'll tell you more about that as I proceed. As I said, I grew up in Birmingham. I spent most of my career at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Started out as a one-year temporary employee and ended up being its director. And I lived a scientific life that one could only dream about, and it certainly wasn't planned. It just happened. I retired, went back to my alma mater, and was ready to rest on my laurels and basically put my feet up, and they literally were going to let me do that. And I thought, because of the way that we grew up, because of the sacrifices that so many people made, I could do that. So that's why I'm here. So my charge is to use my experience, connections, to help the president realize his vision of taking us from a $30 million research program to a sustainable $50 million supported research program, move us from Category 3 to Category 2, all of those things that you heard the president talk about. I'm here to be a tool, and here, it ain't about me. It's really about this institution and how we can carry it forward. Now, there's a lot of stuff that got to be fixed, and I'm not going to throw you on the bus, Mr. President, well, or duck. We got to fix some stuff. First of all, we have to learn to operate at the speed of business. And I'll be pleading with the president to allow us to do that. I understand that he is going to give my office some additional responsibilities to carry out. And I'm going to ask for more. He's not going to give me everything I'm going to ask, but I'm going to be there pushing on your behalf so that we can get to where we all want to be. Also, I'm going to convince him, one way or the other, that we have to find a way to return, now that we're asking you to get more involved in research endeavors across this university, we have to find a way to get more of the indirect costs from that research back to you. And there's a simple reason for that. If you are going to do those things, you have to get resources to enable you to do that. Also, speaking personally, I'm not so sure I want to stick my neck out that far and try to convince other agencies and organizations to give us research money if you don't have the resources to be successful doing that. So we'll find a way to get that done. And the final thing is, my operation is not perfect. In fact, we dropped the ball a lot of times. Going forward, I can guarantee you, maybe not tomorrow, but in the near future, DRED will be open for business to you 24/7, one way or the other. You will not call our offices and not get a phone answered. It won't take stuff an infinite amount of time to work through our office. We are here to serve you, and we have to find a way to do that more efficiently and more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. May.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. Hope everybody's energized and ready to rock and roll. We are getting ready for our students to move in this weekend. We're pretty excited. We have one of the largest freshman classes ever, and oh, I'm sorry. There we go. You hear me now? Okay, and we're excited about the things that are following this coming year. As you know, the Division of Student Affairs is comprised of about 10 departments, and basically our job is to support the learning experience of the students and facilitate that learning that happens outside the classroom. And believe me, as I always say, learning does happen outside the classroom. But the main thing is to make sure that we're supporting our students so that they can excel in the classroom and graduate and realize their dreams of getting a college degree and matriculate out and being proud Morgan alums. The organizational chart that I provided for you is you can go to the next slide, please. Again, it shows you the departments that we have, 10 departments, the University Student Center, University Health Center, Intramural Recreations, the University Chapel, Center for Career Development, Counseling Center, Student Rights and Responsibilities, the BEAR team, the Office of Housing and Residential Life, and Campus Police and Safety are the 10 departments that comprise the Division of Student Affairs. Every year I come to you, I ask you this question, and I ask you to repeat after me and tell me, I am. What am I? Mandatory reporter. I am a mandatory reporter. You know what I'm talking about. That's in reference to Title IX complaints. If you receive a Title IX complaint as a faculty member, remember you are a mandatory reporter, and it must be reported to Ms. Tanika Barber in the Office of EEO and Diversity. Must be. If they tell you in any capacity, you must report it. I also wanted to bring to you the names of a few people. January Minns is our BEAR team case manager, and some of you may have had conversations. She's been working with several departments directly as students come up that are expressing or presenting some distress and disturbed behaviors. A lot of times what we find out is students sometimes need help with medication, they need some support, and that is her role as a social worker to help work with these students along with our counseling center to make sure these students could be on track and be successful. The next person I wanted to mention was Mr. Seymour Chambers. He's our Director for Student Rights and Responsibilities. Sometimes things go bump in the classroom. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes students are disruptive. If that should happen, reach out to Mr. Chambers or my office so that we can support you and deal with the situation regarding the students. Yes, you can ask a student to leave the classroom. However, there is a process that they have an opportunity for, they have due process, which means you just can't randomly kick them out and say they can't come back. But we will work with you in those situations. Sometimes we have to move students to different sections. Sometimes we have to have students drop their class. But they have to go through due process, okay? Student Organization Summit is Friday night, September 7th, and Saturday, September 8th. I'm mentioning that because some of you also serve as advisors. I know one of those sessions you'll get an email from the Office of Student Life and Development that it's mandatory for student leaders, and one session is mandatory if you advise a student organization. I mention this because it's really critical that our student organizations have advising. And we go over all the rules and regulations surrounding advising student organizations and what you need to do to be successful, to help our students be successful. Again, that's Friday, September 7th, and Saturday, September 8th. Parents Week and Parent and Family Weekend this year is November the 3rd, 2018, and we will be playing Bethune-Cookman on that day. By the way, we still need volunteers for Freshman Moving this Saturday. If you want to volunteer for Freshman Moving, you can go on the Office of Residential Life's website and sign up, put your information in. They'll let you know what time to show up. They'll give you a t-shirt if you participate. It's a great opportunity to see our students, the new students moving in, and welcome them. Lastly, I want to mention September 1st, because it's our first home football game, where the Bears will be taking on Towson University in the rematch for Greater Baltimore. So please make yourself available, be a friend, bring a smile, and let's go and greet these students as they come to the campus this coming fall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Banks. And that information will come again on MSU announcements, Dr. Banks. So if you need to remember the dates, then you can find them there. Thanks very much. Mr. Evans.
Okay, good morning. Good afternoon. I want to welcome all of you, new faculty, returning faculty, back to Morgan State University. And from the division, my slides, from the Division of Finance and Management, we welcome everyone back. Also would like to thank Madam Provost for inviting me once again, even though you reduced my time. Every year the time gets reduced, but we will stay within the 3 minutes. I am not gonna read our mission and vision, but I will tell you, finance and management, our division, we are the safe keepers of the university's assets. A university's assets are based on 3 components: financial assets, money, budget, cash; human assets, people and people resources; and physical assets, plant, facilities, and operations. That's what we do. And we are striving for innovation, change management, and improve customer service. Next slide. I'm not going to go through the organization, but there are basically 4 components. Kim McCalla controls the planning of facilities. Our good friend, Big Janet, who retired in December, that job has not been filled. We had a search, but you know, big shoes are really huge to fill, and we weren't successful. And then we have Deb Flavin running our accounting operations. Then we have others running additional operations of finance and management. Ms. Grant with Human Resources. Ron Stevenson is the interim director for Auxiliary Enterprises. And Lois Whitaker is the director of procurement. Also have to say, I have a great staff, and my office is run by Ms. Stacy Ben. So if you need to get in touch with me or have issues around our division, you can start with Ms. Stacy Ben. And then I have a outstanding special assistant in Ms. Cassandra Grogan, who just about assists me in everything that I do. I know the president talked, next 2 slides, please. I know the president talked briefly about the budget, but with budgets, the devil is in the details. So I want to give you a little details. The total budget, operating budget for fiscal year 2019 is $262 million. That budget is made up of 5 components. The largest component is the state appropriation, which the president mentioned. It has now grown to $97 million, or 37%, the orange pie. Tuition and fees, gross tuition and fees, are $69 million, or 26%. The federal contracts that my good colleague, Dr. May, talked about is $54 million, and that includes the Pell Grants for the students. And then we have auxiliary enterprises of $35 million, or 13%. Next slide. How we spend this money, the revenue comes in. We are required to have a balanced budget by the state, by investors, by rating agencies, and our largest component of our operating expenses, as you can imagine, is salaries, wages, and benefits. That represents 44% of the total $262 million, or 44%. The next largest component is financial aid to support our students. That component represents 15% of $39 million. That number is made up of Pell Grants as well, plus institutional aid. The next category, contractual services, represent $33 million, or 13%. These are all our contracts, our maintenance agreements, et cetera. The next is what we call operating expenses, and that's kind of a catch-all for travel and supplies and computers and technology. That represents $34 million, or 13%. Then we have contractual salary and wages, which represent $32 million, or 12%. And lastly, we have a utility budget of $7.3 million. Next couple of slides. I'm not going to talk about the facilities. I think the president did a great job giving us an overview. But I will say that Ms. Kim McCalla, who's been here, I think, about 10 years, each one of her projects has been on time, on budget. I don't even know, is Kim here? I don't see her, but she's probably working on the facility issue right now. That's why she's probably not here. But anyway, the state has been very good to Morgan the last 10 years. We have a current request of $283 million. The 5-year capital plan is $190 million. And to date, since Dr. Wilson has been here, the state has given us over $400 million in capital improvements. So those are all the fine buildings that you see. The next couple of slides. I know the president mentioned our credit rating. This is the 3rd straight year we've had an affirmation. And for those who do not know that much about credit ratings, just think of your FICO score. This credit rating is synonymous with an individual's FICO score. And I can tell you the rating agencies downgrade more institutions each year than increase the bond rating. So an affirmation is a great place to be. And as the president said, we are tied for #1 for HBCUs with Spelman, who has an endowment of $300 million, but we're equally financially solid. So that's a great contribution to all of you and all of us at Morgan. The other thing I would like to say about the bond rating is that the A+ rating, there are more schools below us than are above us. So again, the A+ rating is very, very important. Moody's rates us as well, and we have an A1 rating with Moody. We are going to be considering issuing some debt in the future. We have over $100 million of deferred maintenance. I'm sure you can point out a lot of this deferred maintenance. If I walk into your individual facilities, we are asking the state for support on deferred maintenance. So in the next few years, you're going to see some major capital improvements, not just with new buildings, but to address some of the work at the old buildings. And Dr. McFadden, I thank you.
Let's give a hand for all of our vice presidents and the wonderful information they've shared with us today. And so now we're at a place that is particularly fun. And this is the awarding of for faculty in the areas of outstanding teaching, research, and service. Dr. Wilson, would you join us, please? Now, this process works like this. The Academic Affairs Division sends out requests from your deans, who solicit names from your chairs, and once we review those, then a committee within the Division of Academic Affairs makes a decision. And so this year, for the Teaching Award, I am thrilled to announce Dr. Amber Hodges, Associate Professor in the College of Liberal Arts. I do want to remind you that there is a stipend that goes along with this, but you can't use it for trips and vacations. You have to use it for things that enhance your productivity. The Research Award goes to Dr. Zipping Wang, Associate Professor in the School of Business and Management. Is Dr. Wang here? Okay, Dr. Bogosian, could you please come up and get the award for her? And the Service Award goes to Dr. Pavlina Ilievo, Assistant Professor in the School of Architecture and Planning. I was just reminded that those stipends are $1,000. Okay. Next, we will have Dr. Farzad Moazzami take us through the process of developing the Promotion and Tenure Appeals Committee, followed by an overview of the upcoming workshops.
Good afternoon and welcome back to all the returning faculty and new faculty. Now, all tenured and tenure-track faculty were sent an email from our office on August 3rd with a link to electronically vote for this academic year's Promotion and Tenure Appeals Grievance Committee. The voting period started on August 3rd and runs through the 10th. So if you have voted, thank you so much, but if you have not, please make sure that you cast your votes following the link on that email. That link is also accessible via the Faculty and Dean's Information Hub on Blackboard. It is important that we establish that committee on time. So if you just bear with me with two more announcements, and then we will be dismissed. Everybody will be dismissed for lunch. At the end of these announcements, please keep in mind that all deans and all faculty are expected to attend sessions this afternoon and tomorrow, which will be held in, well, this afternoon sessions will be held in the University Student Center Theater starting at 2 o'clock. Lunch is on your own, please enjoy. And don't forget to join the President's reception this afternoon from 4:30 till 6 o'clock. Is also in the Student Center ballroom. And also, I would like to remind you that make sure to complete every evaluation and survey that you have in the folder of the plenary sessions and workshops for tomorrow. Also, faculty, please be reminded that you're required to attend both days of the Faculty Institute in their entirety, and please be sure to review the program booklet for logistics and the locations for tomorrow's workshops as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moazami, and thank you all again for being here. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you back at 2 o'clock.